They said she would never marry, not Felicity Ashford, with her too wide mouth and her preference for books over balls. While her younger sister Charlotte glittered like a diamond, Felicity was relegated to the shadows of every drawing room, every assembly, every hope. The whispers followed her like spectres, the plain one, the spinster in waiting, unfit for the ton. But on one extraordinary night, beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Queen's own ballroom, a duke would shatter every cruel assumption. And when Dominic Greystone extended his gloved hand to the woman the world had dismissed, he ignited a scandal that would reshape two destinies forever. What they didn't know was that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary heroines. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ashford House in Mayfair, casting geometric patterns across the Aubusson carpet where Felicity Ashford sat with her embroidery hoop. She had learned long ago to make herself small, to occupy the corners of rooms, while her sister Charlotte commanded their centres. At 23, Felicity had accepted her role in the family tableau, the sensible elder daughter, the competent household manager, the woman whose only value lay in her usefulness rather than her beauty. "Sit straighter, Felicity," her mother, Lady Constance Ashford, instructed, without looking up from her correspondence. "Even if you lack Charlotte's natural grace, you needn't compound the deficiency with poor posture." Felicity adjusted her spine against the settee, her fingers never pausing in their methodical stitching. She had become adept at absorbing such criticisms, letting them glance off the armor she had constructed over years of similar observations. Her mother had never been deliberately cruel. She simply stated facts as she perceived them. Charlotte was the beauty. Felicity was not. It was as immutable as the seasons. "Mamma, must I wear the ivory silk tonight?" Charlotte's voice drifted from the doorway, accompanied by the rustle of expensive fabric. At 19, Charlotte Ashford was everything Regency society deemed perfect. Golden-haired, blue-eyed, with features so delicate they seemed painted by a master's hand. "I thought perhaps the rose satin with the Belgian lace. The ivory is more appropriate for such an occasion," Lady Constance replied. "Lord Pemberton's mother will be in attendance, and we must make the proper impression." Felicity's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. Lord Pemberton. Charlotte had secured the attention of one of the season's most eligible bachelors, the heir to an earldom, possessed of 30,000 a year and an estate in Derbyshire. It was a triumph that would elevate the entire Ashford family, and Felicity was genuinely pleased for her sister. What else could she be? Marriage to a man of consequence had never been her destiny. "Felicity will wear her green muslin," Lady Constance continued, as if discussing the arrangement of furniture. "It's serviceable, and she needn't draw attention. Her purpose tonight is to support Charlotte, nothing more." Charlotte swept into the room, her morning dress a confection of sprigged muslin that made her look like a spring flower. She caught Felicity's eye and offered a small, apologetic smile. Despite everything, there was affection between the sisters. Charlotte had never chosen to be beautiful any more than Felicity had chosen to be plain. They were both playing roles assigned by an accident of birth. "I think Felicity looks lovely in green," Charlotte offered, settling beside her sister with a grace that seemed effortless. "It brings out the amber in her eyes." "Hazel eyes are no substitute for proper beauty," their mother said dismissively. "But it matters not. Lord Pemberton has made his intentions clear, and tonight's ball at Somerset House will serve to solidify the understanding. The Earl and Countess of Pemberton expect the announcement within the fortnight." Felicity absorbed this information with her customary composure, though something tightened in her chest. A fortnight. In 2 weeks' time, Charlotte would be betrothed to a man she had known for less than 2 months. But such was the way of their world. Marriages were arrangements, alliances forged between families of suitable rank and fortune. Love was a luxury, if it came at all. "Are you not excited, Charlotte?" Felicity asked softly, setting aside her embroidery to study her sister's face. There was something brittle in Charlotte's smile, a tension around her eyes that seemed at odds with her impending triumph. "Of course she is excited," Lady Constance answered before Charlotte could speak. "Any sensible girl would be. Lord Pemberton is a remarkable catch, handsome, wealthy, well-connected. What more could one desire?" Kindness, Felicity thought but did not say. Respect, genuine affection. She had observed Lord Pemberton at various functions throughout the season, had noted the way his eyes followed other women even while dancing with Charlotte, the proprietary manner in which he spoke of his future wife, as if she were an acquisition rather than a person. But perhaps Felicity was simply too particular, too inclined to judge. After all, what did she know of such matters? The afternoon passed in the usual preparations for an evening event. Felicity assisted Charlotte with her toilette, dressing her sister's golden hair in an elaborate style interwoven with pearls. In the mirror, their reflections told the story everyone already knew. Charlotte, luminous in ivory silk that draped her figure perfectly. Felicity, serviceable in green muslin that was neither fashionable nor entirely unfashionable, her brown hair arranged in a simple knot. "You have beautiful hands," Charlotte observed, watching Felicity work. "Such long, elegant fingers, and your hair has more depth of color than mine, like polished mahogany when the light catches it." Felicity smiled at her sister's kindness. "You needn't invent compliments for my benefit. I know what I am." "Do you?" Charlotte turned to face her directly, an unusual intensity in her gaze. "Sometimes I wonder if any of us truly knows what we are, or if we simply become what others expect." Before Felicity could respond, their mother's voice carried up the stairs, summoning them to the waiting carriage. The moment passed, and Charlotte's pensive expression vanished behind the brilliant smile she wore as easily as her jewellery. The ball at Somerset House was a glittering affair, the cream of London society assembled beneath painted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Felicity took her customary position along the wall with the other wallflowers and chaperones, content to observe rather than participate. She had long ago stopped hoping for invitations to dance. Gentlemen's eyes slid past her as if she were part of the architecture, invisible and unremarkable. From her vantage point, she watched Charlotte move through the opening cotillion with Lord Pemberton. They made a stunning couple, eliciting admiring glances from all quarters. Lord Pemberton was tall and fair, dressed in impeccable evening attire, his cravat tied in an elaborate mathematical that spoke of both wealth and attention to fashion. He smiled at Charlotte, but it was a smile of satisfaction rather than tenderness, the expression of a man surveying a particularly fine acquisition. "The Ashford chit has done well for herself," an elderly matron remarked to her companion nearby, not bothering to lower her voice. "Though one cannot help but pity the elder sister. 23 and not a single prospect. She'll be a burden on the family for years to come." Felicity kept her expression neutral, her eyes fixed on the dancers. She had heard worse. The Ton could be viciously honest about those it deemed failures, and an unmarried woman past 20 was already dancing on the edge of irrelevance. The evening progressed with predictable rhythms. Charlotte danced every set, her card filled within minutes of arrival. Lord Pemberton remained attentive, though Felicity noticed his gaze wandering to Lady Seraphina Worthing, a widowed Viscountess whose beauty was matched only by her scandalous reputation. Meanwhile, Felicity accepted a cup of negus from a passing footman and settled in for a long night of observation. It was during the supper interval that the evening's choreography shifted. Felicity had retreated to a small antechamber off the main ballroom, seeking a few moments of solitude before the second half of the ball commenced. She was examining a particularly fine landscape painting when voices from the corridor drew her attention. "Quite the prettiest thing this season," Lord Pemberton's distinctive drawl carried through the partially open door. "Like a porcelain doll, really, perfectly decorative." "And the dowry?" another male voice inquired. 15,000. Respectable, though not extraordinary, but the Ashfords are well connected, and the girl is biddable. She'll make a suitable countess, produce an heir or two, manage the household, stay out of my affairs." Lord Pemberton's laugh was low and self-satisfied. "The mother assures me she's been properly trained to understand a husband's prerogatives." Felicity's hand tightened on her fan. She should make her presence known, should cough or rustle her skirts to alert them. But she remained frozen, listening to Lord Pemberton discuss her sister as if she were a broodmare being evaluated for purchase. "And what of the other sister?" the second voice asked. "The plain one? Miss Felicity." Lord Pemberton's tone turned dismissive. "A nonentity. Useful for household management, I suppose, but entirely without appeal. One wonders what defect of breeding produced such a disparity between the sisters. Still, she'll be no concern of mine once the marriage is settled. I've already suggested to Lady Constance that Miss Felicity might be persuaded to reside with a distant relation. No need for awkward reminders of imperfection in one's household." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Felicity had heard enough. She pressed her hand against her midsection, willing away the nausea that threatened. It wasn't the casual cruelty about her own appearance that wounded. She had armor against such barbs. It was the confirmation of what Lord Pemberton truly thought of Charlotte, the cold calculation behind his courtship that made her chest ache with fury and helplessness. She had to warn Charlotte. But how? What could she say that wouldn't sound like jealousy or spite? Their mother would never believe her, would interpret any objection as the bitterness of a rejected spinster. And Charlotte herself, raised to believe that a brilliant match was the highest achievement of womanhood, might not even see the danger until it was too late. Felicity composed herself and returned to the ballroom, her mind churning with impossible dilemmas. The scene before her seemed suddenly hollow, all these glittering people performing an elaborate dance of courtship and alliance, none of it concerned with genuine feeling or regard. She found Charlotte surrounded by admirers, her laughter light and practiced. When their eyes met across the room, Felicity saw a flash of something. Was it desperation? Before Charlotte's social mask reasserted itself. The ball continued into the early morning hours, a blur of music and movement. Just before their departure, Lord Pemberton made a great show of requesting a private word with Lord Ashford, Charlotte's father. The significance was clear to everyone present. The formal offer would be made tomorrow, the engagement announced before week's end. The Ashford family's triumph was complete. In the carriage ride home, Lady Constance could speak of nothing else, detailing every congratulation received, every envious glance noted. Charlotte sat silent, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the darkened window. Felicity wanted to reach for her sister's hand, to offer some comfort or warning, but she remained still, trapped in her own powerlessness. Only when they had reached home and retired to their separate chambers did Felicity allow herself to feel the weight of the evening. She stood at her window overlooking the garden, still dressed in her green muslin, and wondered if this was all life held, watching from the margins while others made terrible choices, powerless to alter the course of events, dismissed and diminished at every turn. Tomorrow Charlotte would accept Lord Pemberton's offer, and Felicity, the plain sister, would smile and offer congratulations, playing her role in a drama that seemed to have been written long before any of them were born. The golden cage was closing, and she could do nothing to prevent it. The morning of Charlotte's engagement ball arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself conspired to make the occasion memorable. Ashford House buzzed with activity, servants polishing silver, arranging flowers, preparing for the evening's announcement that would cement the family's social triumph. Felicity moved through the chaos with her usual efficiency, checking details her mother overlooked, ensuring that everything would be perfect for Charlotte's moment of glory. She found her sister in her bedchamber, still in her morning dress despite the hour growing late. Charlotte stood at the window, her posture uncharacteristically rigid, her reflection in the glass pale and drawn. "Charlotte?" Felicity entered quietly, closing the door behind her. "Are you unwell? Mamma has been asking for you. The modiste is here for final adjustments to your gown." Charlotte didn't turn. Do you ever wonder, Felicity, what it would be like to simply disappear? To wake up someone else entirely, somewhere else, with a different life? Felicity's breath caught. She moved to her sister's side, trying to read the expression in that beautiful, troubled face. Charlotte, if you have doubts, if Lord Pemberton is not what you wish, what I wish. Charlotte's laugh was bitter. When has that ever mattered? I am 19 years old, and my entire existence has been preparation for this. To secure a titled husband, to bring honor to the family, to be ornamental and obedient. What I wish is irrelevant. It's not. Felicity grasped her sister's hand, urgency making her bold. Charlotte, listen to me. I overheard Lord Pemberton at Somerset House. The things he said about you, about marriage, about his expectations. I know what he is. Charlotte's voice was flat, defeated. I'm not blind, Felicity. I see how he looks at other women, how he speaks to me as if I were a child or a possession. But what alternative do I have? Refuse him and wait for what? There are no other offers. This is my chance, perhaps my only chance, to fulfill the purpose for which I was raised. Before Felicity could respond, their mother's voice called from the corridor, sharp with impatience. Charlotte straightened, drawing herself up with visible effort, and transformed. The melancholy girl vanished, replaced by the radiant beauty everyone expected. She squeezed Felicity's hand once, briefly, then released it and swept from the room, leaving Felicity standing alone with words of warning dying on her lips. The engagement ball began at 8 o'clock. The Ashford ballroom transformed into a bower of white roses and golden candelabra. The guest list represented the pinnacle of society, peers and peeresses, politicians and patronesses of Almack's, everyone who mattered in their carefully stratified world. Felicity wore a gown of pale blue silk, more fashionable than her usual attire at her mother's insistence that even she must look presentable for such an occasion. Not that it mattered. She was still invisible, still the plain sister whose only function was to highlight Charlotte's beauty by contrast. Charlotte descended the stairs at 8:30, a vision in white and gold that drew gasps of admiration. Her gown was a masterpiece of delicate embroidery, her hair dressed with flowers, a diamond necklace, a betrothal gift from Lord Pemberton glittering at her throat. She smiled with practiced grace, accepting congratulations from the assembled guests, every inch the triumphant bride-to-be. Lord Pemberton stood at the base of the stairs, resplendent in black evening attire, his fair hair gleaming in the candlelight. He offered Charlotte his arm with a flourish, and together they opened the ball, moving through a waltz that seemed choreographed for maximum visual impact. They were the picture of aristocratic perfection, beautiful, privileged, destined for a glittering future. Felicity watched from her customary position, a hollow feeling in her chest. She had tried to warn Charlotte, had tried to make her see the danger in Lord Pemberton's cold calculation. But perhaps Charlotte was right. What alternatives existed in their world? A woman's security, her very survival, depended on marriage, and suitable matches were rare commodities. Better a husband who viewed you as decorative property than no husband at all, or so society insisted. The evening progressed through its expected rhythms. Supper was announced at 10 o'clock, and guests filed into the dining room, where tables had been arranged for the elaborate meal. Lord Ashford stood to offer a toast, his voice thick with emotion and wine, as he announced the formal betrothal of his daughter Charlotte to Lord Pemberton. Crystal glasses were raised, congratulations offered, the engagement now official in the eyes of society. It was after the toasts, as guests mingled between the ballroom and the supper room, that catastrophe struck with the sudden violence of a summer storm. Felicity was speaking with Lady Margaret Thornbury, a kindly older woman who had always been gracious to her, when a commotion near the ballroom entrance drew their attention. Voices rose above the general conversation, sharp with shock and scandal. The music faltered and died. Guests turned toward the source of the disturbance, creating a pathway through which Lord Pemberton strode, his expression thunderous, his hand clasped around the wrist of a woman in emerald silk. Lady Seraphina Worthing, The beautiful widow, whose reputation had always teetered on the edge of respectability, looked both defiant and vindicated as Lord Pemberton pulled her into the centre of the ballroom. Charlotte stood frozen near the refreshment table, her face draining of colour, one hand pressed against the diamond necklace at her throat. "Since we are making announcements this evening," Lord Pemberton declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room, "I find myself compelled to make one of my own." His smile was cruel, his eyes bright with something that might have been excitement or malice, perhaps both. "I cannot in good conscience continue this charade when my heart belongs to another." Lady Constance made a strangled sound. Lord Ashford moved toward the centre of the room, his face purple with rage or humiliation, but Lord Pemberton was not finished. "Miss Charlotte Ashford is a lovely girl," he continued, each word precisely calibrated for maximum damage, "perfectly acceptable as a decoration for one's drawing room. But I have come to realize that I require more than mere prettiness in a wife. Lady Seraphina and I have discovered an affection that transcends the cold calculations of society matches. We are to be married." The gasps that rippled through the assembly were like physical blows. Felicity watched Charlotte sway slightly, her knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not like this. Not with 300 witnesses to the destruction of everything Charlotte had been raised to achieve. "You gave your word, sir." Lord Ashford's voice shook. "The settlements are drawn up, the announcement made. No documents have been signed," Lord Pemberton interrupted smoothly. "I'm within my rights to reconsider. Surely you cannot expect me to chain myself to a girl who, charming as she may be, lacks the depth and passion I require." His gaze swept dismissively over Charlotte, and Felicity felt rage ignite in her chest like wildfire. "Besides," he added, almost as an afterthought, "there are certain deficiencies in the Ashford bloodline that give one pause. One need only look at the elder sister to see evidence of unfortunate hereditary traits." The insult landed like a slap. Every eye in the room turned briefly to Felicity before sliding away in embarrassment. But Felicity barely registered her own humiliation. All her attention was fixed on Charlotte, who had begun to tremble, tears streaming down her face, destroying the careful composure of years. "You are no gentleman," Lady Constance said, her voice breaking. "Perhaps not by your limited definition," Lord Pemberton replied, "but I am an earl's heir, with wealth and position enough to withstand any temporary scandal. In 6 months, society will have forgotten this evening. The Ashfords, however," he let the implication hang in the air, "a family with a publicly jilted daughter, a broken engagement announced and then spectacularly dissolved. They would never fully recover from such a blow." Lady Seraphina spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "Really, it's better this way. Charlotte is far too young and insipid for a man of George's sophistication. She'll find someone more suited to her limited capacities, if anyone will have her now." Charlotte made a sound like a wounded animal. She turned and fled from the ballroom, her white skirts a blur as she disappeared into the corridor beyond. Felicity started to follow, but her mother's hand on her arm stopped her. "Stay," Lady Constance commanded, her voice barely audible. "We cannot afford to make this worse with dramatic displays." But her face had gone grey, aged 10 years in as many minutes. The ballroom had erupted into scandalized whispers. Guests who moments before had been offering congratulations now looked away, embarrassed or entertained by the spectacle. Some began making excuses to leave, sensing that the evening had crossed from celebration into something darker. Lord Pemberton, seemingly satisfied with the devastation he had wrought, escorted Lady Seraphina toward the exit, accepting the congratulations of a few shameless fortune hunters and scandal seekers. Felicity stood paralyzed between duty to her mother and love for her sister. Around her, the edifice of their family's reputation crumbled with each whispered comment, each knowing glance. Charlotte had been publicly humiliated in the cruelest possible fashion, her beauty and grace declared insufficient by the man who had courted her, and the carefully constructed world in which they lived offered no recourse, no justice, only the cold calculus of social ruin. "Please," Felicity whispered to her mother, "let me go to her." Lady Constance's hand tightened briefly, then released. "Go. There's nothing more to be salvaged here." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time in Felicity's memory, her indomitable mother looked broken. Felicity fled the ballroom, searching the darkened corridors of their home for Charlotte. She found her in the conservatory, collapsed among the ferns and orchids, still wearing the white gown that was supposed to symbolize triumph. Charlotte looked up at her approach, her face ravaged by tears, the diamond necklace, Lord Pemberton's gift, torn from her throat and lying shattered on the floor. "Everyone saw," Charlotte whispered. "Everyone knows. I am ruined, Felicity, utterly ruined. What gentleman will want me now? Who will overlook the scandal of being publicly rejected by Lord Pemberton?" Felicity sank down beside her sister, gathering her into her arms. "Hush. We'll find a way through this. You are so much more than what happened tonight." "Am I?" Charlotte pulled back, her eyes wild. "What am I, if not the beautiful daughter who was supposed to make a brilliant match? That was my entire purpose, my only value, and I have failed. Failed spectacularly before the entire ton. There were no words adequate to the moment, no comfort equal to the devastation." Felicity simply held her sister while the sounds of departing guests filtered through the house. The murmur of scandal being dissected, reputations being destroyed, one whispered comment at a time. In the morning, the disaster would be complete. The scandal sheets would carry the story, each telling more sensational than the last. Invitations would cease. Former friends would cut them on the street. The Ashford family would become a cautionary tale, a source of entertainment for a society that fed on such tragedies. And Felicity, the plain sister who had been dismissed as insignificant, would become doubly invisible. Now tainted by association with scandal, her already dim prospects extinguished entirely. It was a complete and total catastrophe, made more unbearable because she had seen it coming and been powerless to prevent it. "I wish I were you," Charlotte said suddenly, her voice small and broken. "You were never raised with expectations that could be destroyed. You were never made to believe your worth depended on securing a titled husband. I almost envy you, Felicity. At least your disappointments have been private." Felicity closed her eyes, tears finally escaping down her own cheeks. Charlotte's words, meant without cruelty, cut deeper than any of Lord Pemberton's calculated insults. Because they revealed the fundamental tragedy of both their lives. One sister raised to be ornamental and then publicly declared insufficient. The other dismissed from birth as unworthy of notice. Different forms of invisible, both equally cruel. The night stretched before them, dark and merciless, while London society sharpened its knives and prepared to feast on the ruins of their family's reputation. The scandal consumed London society with the voracious appetite of wildfire. Within days, the Ashford name became synonymous with humiliation, discussed in drawing rooms, dissected in gentlemen's clubs, immortalized in vicious caricatures sold on street corners. Lady Constance retreated to her rooms, seeing no visitors. Lord Ashford closeted himself with solicitors, attempting to salvage some fragment of their reputation, and Charlotte, her spirit shattered, rarely left her bedchamber, staring at walls with vacant eyes that frightened Felicity more than any display of grief. It was their Aunt Agatha who arrived, like a cavalry rescue in the midst of catastrophe. Lady Agatha Hartwell, Lord Ashford's widowed elder sister, swept into Ashford House with the decisive energy that had characterized her entire unconventional life. She was a woman in her late 50s, handsome rather than beautiful, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Unlike most widows, she had never remarried after her husband's death 20 years prior. Instead, establishing an independent household in Bath and pursuing intellectual interests that scandalized and fascinated society in equal measure. "This is absurd," Aunt Agatha announced, surveying the gloom-shrouded drawing room where Felicity sat attempting to read. "Hiding like criminals when the only crime committed was by that contemptible Pemberton boy and his equally contemptible widow. Where is Charlotte?" "Upstairs. She hasn't come down in 3 days." Felicity set aside her book, relief flooding through her at her aunt's commanding presence. "Aunt Agatha, I'm so glad you've come. I didn't know what to do." "Of course you didn't. You've been taught to endure rather than act, to accept rather than challenge." Aunt Agatha settled on the sofa, her travelling dress practical rather than fashionable, her expression fierce. "Well, no more. I'm taking you both out of this mausoleum. You'll come to Bath with me until this storm passes. Bath society is more forgiving, more diverse. And distance from London will give Charlotte time to heal without constant reminders of her ordeal. Mama will never agree." "Your mama has no choice. I've already spoken with your father. He sees the wisdom in removing you both from London's scrutiny. Besides," Aunt Agatha's smile was wry, "what prospects remain here? Charlotte needs time away from the marriage mart, and you, my dear Felicity, need something you've never had. The opportunity to discover who you might be beyond the role your family has assigned you." Within the week, Felicity and Charlotte were installed in Aunt Agatha's spacious townhouse on the Royal Crescent, with its sweeping views of Bath's elegant Georgian crescents and the surrounding Somerset hills. The change of scenery did little for Charlotte initially. She remained withdrawn, taking meals in her room, venturing out only for short walks in the private garden. But Felicity found herself unexpectedly responsive to her new surroundings. Bath, she discovered, was different from London in fundamental ways. While the Tun's influence reached even here, Bath society included a broader spectrum: scholars and artists, reformers and radicals, people whose worth was measured by intellect and accomplishment rather than exclusively by birth and fortune. Aunt Agatha moved easily through this world, her home a gathering place for conversation and debate. "Stop hiding in corners," Aunt Agatha commanded one evening, finding Felicity attempting to slip away from a gathering in the drawing room. "These are intelligent people, Felicity, not the shallow peacocks of London's ballrooms. They'll judge you by your thoughts, not your profile. I have no thoughts worthy of sharing with such accomplished people. Nonsense. I've seen your correspondence, noticed the books in your chamber. You have a keen mind that's been systematically stifled by a society that finds thinking women inconvenient. No more of that." Aunt Agatha physically steered her back toward the assembled guests. "Mr. Blackwood, allow me to introduce my niece, Miss Felicity Ashford. Felicity, Mr. Blackwood is a naturalist recently returned from an expedition to the Scottish Highlands." Mr. Blackwood, a lean man in his 30s with wind-weathered features and intelligent grey eyes, bowed politely. "Miss Ashford, your aunt mentions you have an interest in natural philosophy." Felicity glanced at Aunt Agatha, who raised an eyebrow expectantly. She took a breath, fighting against years of conditioning that insisted she remain silent and agreeable. Yes. I've read Mr. Darwin's work and Mr. Lyell's theories on geology, though I confess much of the mathematics exceeds my understanding." What followed was the first genuine intellectual conversation of Felicity's life. Mr. Blackwood spoke passionately about his research into Highland ecology, asking her opinions, listening when she spoke, treating her observations as worthy of consideration. When she tentatively mentioned a question about species adaptation, he looked at her with something like respect. "That's a remarkably astute observation, Miss Ashford. You've identified one of the central debates in current naturalist circles." The evening passed in a blur of discussion and discovery. Felicity met a Mrs. Sedgwick, who published essays on social reform, a Miss Thornley, who painted landscapes that rivaled any in the Academy exhibitions, a Reverend Pemberton, no relation to the infamous Earl's heir, who somehow reconciled progressive theology with his clerical position. For the first time in her memory, Felicity found herself engaged rather than enduring, participating rather than observing. It was during the second week in Bath that Felicity first encountered Dr. Dominic Thornfield. She had ventured into the circulating library on Milsom Street, seeking new reading material, when she quite literally collided with a gentleman emerging from the history section with an armload of volumes. Books cascaded to the floor. Felicity dropped to her knees immediately, murmuring apologies as she gathered the scattered texts. Large, capable hands joined hers in the retrieval, and a voice with a hint of amusement said, "Please, the fault was entirely mine. I was so engrossed in Gibbon that I failed to notice where I was walking." Felicity looked up and found herself meeting the eyes of a man unlike any she had encountered in London's ballrooms. He was tall, perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair slightly dishevelled from scholarly pursuits rather than careful styling. His clothing marked him as a gentleman, well-made but not ostentatiously fashionable. But it was his face that arrested her attention, intelligent, open, with lines around his eyes that suggested both humour and serious thought. Not conventionally handsome by Tun's standards, but striking in a way that had nothing to do with superficial perfection. Gibbon's Decline and Fall, Felicity found herself asking, genuinely curious rather than making polite conversation. I found his treatment of early Christianity fascinating, if perhaps overly sceptical. The gentleman's eyebrows rose in evident surprise and pleasure. "You've read Gibbon? All 6 volumes?" "Well, 5. I confess the 6th volume's political intricacies lost me somewhat." His smile transformed his face entirely. "Dr. Dominic Thornfield, Miss Ashford. Miss Felicity Ashford." She waited for the inevitable recognition, the subtle withdrawal that always followed her name in London circles. But Dr. Thornfield showed no sign of connecting her to any scandal. "A pleasure, Miss Ashford. Are you residing in Bath or merely visiting?" "Staying with my aunt, Lady Hartwell." "And you, Dr. Thornfield, are you a physician?" "Medical doctor by training, though currently more interested in public health reform than private practice. I'm consulting with the city authorities on improving sanitation systems, dreadfully dull to most people, but I find the intersection of medicine, engineering, and social policy endlessly fascinating." They spoke for nearly an hour, standing amid the library stacks, oblivious to other patrons navigating around them. Dr. Thornfield spoke passionately about cholera prevention, about the need for clean water and proper sewage systems, about how disease disproportionately affected the poor. Felicity found herself asking questions, offering observations, engaging in the kind of substantive discussion she had always craved but never experienced. "I'm presenting a paper at the Philosophical Society next week," Dr. Thornfield said, as they finally made their way to the lending desk with their selections, "on the correlation between water quality and disease rates. Would you, that is, the Society welcomes educated guests, and I should be honored if you would attend, if it interests you, of course. I don't wish to presume—" "I should like that very much," Felicity said, surprising herself with her immediate acceptance. His smile was warm and genuine. "Excellent. Until next week then, Miss Ashford." Felicity walked home in a daze, barely noticing the Bath streets around her. For the first time in her life, a gentleman had sought her company not out of politeness or obligation, but because he valued her thoughts. Dr. Thornfield had looked at her as if she mattered, as if her opinions were worth hearing. It was an entirely novel experience, both exhilarating and unsettling. That evening at dinner, Aunt Agatha noted her niece's unusual animation. "You look more alive than I've seen you since your arrival, Felicity. What has occasioned this transformation?" Felicity described her encounter with Dr. Thornfield, trying to keep her tone casual. Aunt Agatha's smile was knowing. Dominic Thornfield, an excellent man. Brilliant, dedicated, possessed of actual principles rather than merely professing them. His family is old Norfolk gentry, though not particularly wealthy. His father is a baron of modest means. Dominic chose medicine rather than the church or army, which shocked his family considerably. He's considered eccentric by Bath standards, but highly respected. He invited me to hear his presentation at the Philosophical Society. Then you must certainly attend. And Felicity, Aunt Agatha's expression grew serious. Don't dismiss your own worth simply because London society declared you insufficient. You are far more than the decorative nothing they attempted to make you. Remember that. The week passed in a blur of new experiences. Charlotte began joining them for meals, still quiet, but showing faint signs of returning to herself. Felicity attended Aunt Agatha's gatherings, gradually finding her voice in conversations about literature, science, and social reform. And always in the back of her mind was the anticipation of seeing Dr. Thornfield again, of discovering whether their initial connection had been real or imagined. The evening of the Philosophical Society presentation arrived with rain pattering against windows. Felicity dressed with unusual care in a gown of deep amber silk, not fashionable by London standards, but elegant nonetheless. Charlotte, in a rare moment of engagement, had helped arrange her hair in a style that actually flattered her features. "You look lovely," Charlotte said softly, studying her sister's reflection. "Happy, somehow, different from London." "Perhaps I am different here," Felicity replied, "or perhaps I'm simply being allowed to be who I actually am." The Philosophical Society met in the assembly rooms, a more informal gathering than the rigid social events of London. Felicity found herself welcomed warmly by Mr. Blackwood and others she had met at Aunt Agatha's gatherings. And when Dr. Thornfield began his presentation, speaking with passionate conviction about the preventable deaths caused by contaminated water, Felicity found herself completely absorbed. After the presentation, amid the questions and discussions that followed, Dr. Thornfield sought her out specifically. "Miss Ashford, I wondered if you might offer your thoughts. You mentioned your interest in natural philosophy. Does this application of scientific principles to social problems interest you as well?" They fell into conversation as naturally as if they had known each other for years. Dr. Thornfield introduced her to colleagues, included her in debates, deferred to her observations. And when the evening concluded and he offered to escort her and Aunt Agatha back to the Royal Crescent, Felicity felt something unfamiliar and fragile beginning to bloom in her chest. Hope. The dangerous, intoxicating possibility that life might hold more than she had been taught to expect. Spring advanced towards summer, and with it came an unexpected transformation. Charlotte, slowly emerging from her grief, began to reclaim fragments of herself that had been suppressed by her role as a decorative beauty. She started painting again, a childhood passion abandoned as frivolous, and her watercolors revealed a genuine talent that had nothing to do with making herself marriageable. She joined Aunt Agatha's literary discussion circle, discovering an aptitude for poetry analysis that surprised everyone, including herself. And Felicity bloomed. There was no other word for the change that overcame her in Bath's more forgiving atmosphere. Dr. Dominic Thornfield became a frequent visitor to Aunt Agatha's home, ostensibly to discuss his work, but increasingly to seek Felicity's company specifically. They walked together on the Crescent, discussing everything from medical ethics to political reform. He lent her books from his own extensive library, and they debated Hume and Voltaire and Mary Wollstonecraft with an intellectual passion Felicity had never dreamed possible. "You should see yourself as others see you," Aunt Agatha observed one morning, watching Felicity prepare for another walk with Dr. Thornfield. "Not plain at all, my dear. Quite striking, actually, when you're animated by genuine feeling rather than trying to disappear." Felicity studied her reflection with surprise. She did look different. Her eyes bright, her posture confident, her features arranged in an expression of anticipation rather than resignation. The green walking dress she wore seemed to bring out the amber in her eyes, and her color was high from so much time outdoors. Not beautiful like Charlotte, perhaps, but no longer the invisible non-entity London had declared her. Dr. Thornfield confirmed this assessment in his own way. One afternoon, as they stood on the Royal Crescent admiring the vista of Bath spread below, he turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Miss Ashford, Felicity, if I may, these past weeks have been among the happiest of my life. Your intelligence, your curiosity, your genuine goodness." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I realize we have known each other only a short time, but I find myself hoping that you might consider, that is, I should like permission to pay you formal court, if your feelings align with mine." Felicity's heart hammered against her ribs. "Dr. Thornfield, Dominic, I must be honest with you. My family is currently embroiled in scandal. My sister was publicly jilted by Lord Pemberton, an event that made us the subject of vicious gossip throughout London. If you associate yourself with me, that taint will follow." "I'm aware of the circumstances," he interrupted gently. "Aunt Agatha told me the entire sorry tale. And I can only say that Lord Pemberton is a fool of epic proportions, and London society's judgment reveals more about its own superficiality than about your family's worth." His hand covered hers on the stone balustrade. "I don't care about scandal, Felicity. I care about finding a partner with whom I can share ideas and purpose. Someone who sees medicine and reform as worthy pursuits rather than eccentricities. Someone who values substance over appearance." "I am that person," Felicity said softly, wonder and joy flooding through her. "And my feelings very much align with yours, Dominic." His smile was radiant. "Then, with your permission, I shall write to your father to formally request—" "Felicity! Felicity!" Charlotte's voice, sharp with alarm, carried across the crescent. She was running, actually running, her skirts hiked up, propriety abandoned, from the direction of Aunt Agatha's house. "Felicity, come quickly. There are visitors from London. Lord Pemberton is here." The joy of the previous moment shattered like crystal. Dominic's hand tightened protectively on Felicity's, but she pulled away, already moving toward her sister. "Charlotte, why would Lord Pemberton come here? What could he possibly want?" "I don't know. But he's in the drawing room with Lady Seraphina, and Aunt Agatha looks furious." They rushed back to the house, Dominic following behind. In the elegant drawing room, an absurd tableau greeted them. Lord Pemberton stood near the fireplace, looking distinctly uncomfortable, while Lady Seraphina, no longer looking quite so triumphant, perched on the edge of a chair. Aunt Agatha presided over the scene, with the grim satisfaction of a general surveying a defeated enemy. "Ah, Felicity," Aunt Agatha said with dangerous calm. "How fortuitous. Lord Pemberton has something he wishes to say to your sister." "Don't you, Lord Pemberton?" Charlotte had frozen in the doorway, all the colour drained from her face at the sight of the man who had destroyed her reputation. Felicity immediately moved to her sister's side, placing herself between Charlotte and Lord Pemberton like a shield. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. "Miss Charlotte, I have come to... That is, circumstances have changed, and I find that I may have acted precipitously." "He's in financial ruin," Lady Seraphina interrupted, her voice bitter. "His father has cut off his allowance after our marriage. Yes, we married 3 weeks ago in Scotland, and it turns out George's personal debts are far more extensive than he led me to believe. He needs your dowry, Charlotte. That's why he's here." Charlotte swayed. Felicity gripped her arm, fury burning away every last vestige of the compliant, invisible girl she had once been. "Get out," Felicity said, her voice low and shaking with rage. "Now, Miss Ashford," Lord Pemberton attempted a placating smile, "I understand emotions are running high, but if Charlotte and I could speak privately—" "Get out!" Felicity advanced on him, all thoughts of propriety abandoned. "You humiliated my sister before 300 witnesses. You declared her insufficiently interesting, too simple for your sophisticated tastes. You shattered her reputation and our family's standing, and now you have the audacity to return when your own fortunes have turned. You are beneath contempt, sir. You are a coward and a fortune hunter and an absolute disgrace to your title." "How dare you?" Lord Pemberton sputtered. I am an earl's heir. You are nothing, Dominic interjected, stepping forward to stand beside Felicity. His voice was cold with contempt. Nothing but a parasite in expensive clothing, and I believe the lady asked you to leave. Lord Pemberton's gaze swept over Dominic, taking in his unfashionable coat and scholarly bearing. And who are you to interfere, some provincial doctor who doesn't understand how society functions? I am Dr. Dominic Thornfield, Dominic replied evenly, and I understand perfectly how society functions, which is precisely why I hold it in such limited regard. Now you have been asked to leave. I suggest you do so before I assist you more forcefully. For a moment, Lord Pemberton looked as if he might argue further, but something in Dominic's expression, or perhaps in the united front, presented by Felicity, Charlotte, Aunt Agatha, and Dominic, convinced him of the futility. He turned to Lady Seraphina, who rose with as much dignity as she could muster. "This is unconscionable," Lady Seraphina declared. "Charlotte, you must see that George is offering you a chance to restore your reputation by accepting the man who destroyed it in the first place." Charlotte's voice was quiet but steady, and when Felicity looked at her sister, she saw strength rather than devastation. "No, I would rather live the rest of my life in retirement than tie myself to someone capable of such cruelty. Please leave, Lord Pemberton. There is nothing for you here." They left, Lord Pemberton blustering about insults and social consequences, Lady Seraphina casting venomous looks behind her. The moment the door closed, Charlotte crumpled into a chair, laughter and tears mixing in equal measure. "Did I really just refuse an earl's heir?" she asked wonderingly. "You did," Aunt Agatha confirmed with fierce pride. "And you, Felicity, I don't believe I've ever heard you raise your voice before. It was magnificent." Felicity was trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and fury. Dominic's hand found hers, steadying her. "I apologize if I overstepped." "You didn't," Charlotte assured him. "Thank you, Dr. Thornfield, both of you. I think I needed to see him one more time to realize that he holds no power over me anymore. He's just a small, greedy man who mistakes cruelty for sophistication." The incident, rather than devastating Charlotte further, seemed to catalyze something within her. Over the following weeks, she became more herself than Felicity had ever seen her. More thoughtful, more genuine, freed from the exhausting performance of perfect beauty that had defined her London existence. And word of Lord Pemberton's humiliating rejection, for in Bath's society the story was framed as Pemberton being rejected rather than Charlotte failing to secure him, spread through both Bath and, inevitably, back to London. Opinion began to shift. Perhaps the Ashford sisters were not the failures society had declared them. Perhaps they were, instead, women of principle who had refused to accept unworthy offers. It was precisely this shifting reputation that resulted in the invitation that would change everything. The Royal Summer Ball at Carlton House in London, an event hosted by the Prince Regent himself, extended invitations to the Ashford family. Aunt Agatha received the summons with grim satisfaction. "This is society's way of indicating that you are no longer entirely beyond the pale," she explained. "They want to see how you fared, whether you're appropriately chastened or have somehow emerged intact." "Must we attend?" Charlotte asked, though with more curiosity than dread. "Yes," Aunt Agatha said firmly. "You must attend and show them that you are not broken, that you have thrived despite their censure. Besides," her smile turned sly, "Dr. Thornfield has also received an invitation. The Prince takes an interest in medical reform, and Dominic's work has attracted royal attention. He'll need a partner for the evening. Won't you, Dr. Thornfield?" Dominic, who had been invited to dine with them that evening, met Felicity's eyes across the table. "If Miss Ashford would do me the honour, the royal ball. A chance to face down the society that had dismissed Felicity and humiliated Charlotte. A chance to demonstrate that they had not merely survived, but transformed." "Yes," Felicity said, her voice steady with new confidence. "We should very much like to attend." The game, she realized, was not over. It was only just beginning. And this time, the plain sister would not be watching from the margins. This time, with Dominic at her side and her own hard-won strength sustaining her, she would step into the center of the ballroom and claim her place. The journey back to London felt nothing like their desperate flight months earlier. Then Felicity and Charlotte had been refugees fleeing scandal's sharp teeth. Now, travelling in Aunt Agatha's comfortable coach with Dominic riding alongside, they returned as different women entirely, tempered by adversity, strengthened by distance, no longer willing to accept society's cruel assessments as immutable truth. London itself seemed unchanged. The same grand houses, the same bustling streets, the same rigid hierarchy that measured worth by birth and fortune. But Felicity viewed it all through altered eyes. What had once seemed an impenetrable fortress of judgment now appeared more fragile, its power dependent upon her willingness to grant it authority over her happiness. Ashford House greeted them with mixed emotions. Lady Constance had aged noticeably, the scandal's weight evident in new lines around her mouth and eyes. But there was relief in her embrace of both daughters, a softening that suggested suffering had taught her something about what truly mattered. "You both look well," she said wonderingly, studying their faces. "Better than well. How is it possible you seem to have thrived while I've been drowning in social ruin? Because we stopped measuring ourselves by society's standards," Charlotte replied gently. "We discovered we were more than ornaments, whose only purpose was making advantageous matches." Lord Ashford was more pragmatic in his reception. "This royal ball invitation is an opportunity to restore the family's standing. I trust you'll comport yourselves appropriately." "Father," Felicity interrupted, "we will comport ourselves with dignity and honesty. If that satisfies society, excellent. If not, we have discovered we can survive and indeed flourish without the Tun's approval." Her father's eyebrows rose in shock at such direct speech from his formerly invisible elder daughter, but Aunt Agatha's approving nod emboldened Felicity to continue. "Dr. Thornfield has asked permission to court me, and I have accepted. He is a gentleman of good family, though his fortune is modest. He is also a man of genuine accomplishment and principle. I hope for your blessing, Father, but I shall not withdraw from the attachment regardless." The room fell silent. Lady Constance looked faint. Lord Ashford opened his mouth, closed it, then finally managed, "Dr. Thornfield of Norfolk, Sir Edward's second son?" "Yes, Father, a medical doctor and reformer whose work has attracted royal notice. He has been invited to the ball specifically to discuss his public health initiatives with the Prince Regent." Lord Ashford exchanged glances with his wife, some silent communication passing between them. Finally he sighed. "I confess, after the disaster with Pemberton, my expectations have been considerably lowered. If this Dr. Thornfield is respectable and treats you well, I shall not object. We can discuss settlements after the ball." It wasn't the enthusiastic blessing Felicity might have wished for, but it was enough. Charlotte squeezed her hand in silent congratulation, and Aunt Agatha smiled with satisfaction. The days before the ball passed in a whirlwind of preparation. But unlike Charlotte's engagement ball, where every detail had been calculated to showcase her sister's beauty, this time the focus was different. The gowns commissioned were elegant, but reflected personal taste rather than fashionable dictates. Charlotte chose a dress of soft lavender that complemented her coloring without the overwhelming formality of her previous wardrobe. Felicity selected a gown of deep sapphire silk that transformed her hazel eyes to something luminous and brought out the auburn highlights in her mahogany hair. "You look like someone entirely different," Charlotte observed as they prepared on the evening of the ball. "Confident, purposeful, rather formidable, actually." "I feel different," Felicity admitted. "I feel like I've finally become who I was always meant to be, before society convinced me I should simply try to disappear." The royal ball at Carlton House was even more magnificent than Felicity remembered from previous events. the Prince Regent's residence transformed into a fantasy of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers and hothouse flowers. The guest list represented the apex of British society, peers and peeresses, politicians and royalty, everyone who commanded power and influence in Regency England. As the Ashford family was announced, Felicity felt eyes turn their direction, heard the whispered commentary that followed their names. But instead of the mortification she would once have felt, she held her head high, her hand tucked into Dominic's offered arm, and met curious stares with calm dignity. "Remember," Dominic murmured as they descended into the ballroom, "you owe these people nothing. Their opinions have no power unless you grant it." The evening's orchestration became apparent quickly. The Prince Regent himself greeted Dr. Thornfield warmly, engaging him in conversation about sewage systems and disease prevention with genuine interest. And when he turned to acknowledge Felicity as Dominic's companion, treating her with courtesy rather than the dismissal she expected, it sent a clear signal to the assembled guests. The Ashford sisters were no longer beyond the pale. Charlotte, too, found unexpected allies. Lady Jersey, one of the patronesses of Almack's, whose approval could make or break a reputation, approached specifically to express admiration for Charlotte's refusal of Lord Pemberton's desperate second proposal. "Word reached London of his attempt to reclaim you after his marriage to that dreadful Worthing woman," Lady Jersey confided. "His subsequent financial collapse has been the scandal of the summer. You showed wisdom beyond your years in refusing him, my dear. Some of us," she glanced meaningfully at several prominent matrons, "have reassessed our initial judgments of the situation." As if that endorsement had opened floodgates, other invitations followed. Charlotte was solicited for dances by respectable gentlemen, engaged in conversation by women who had cut her months earlier. The Ton, Felicity realized with cynical clarity, had decided that the narrative had shifted. Lord Pemberton was the villain, and the Ashford sisters were victims who had risen above their persecution. It was self-serving revisionist history, but she would accept it if it eased Charlotte's path forward. It was during the supper interval that the inevitable confrontation occurred. Felicity and Dominic had retreated to the refreshment room when Lord Pemberton himself appeared, looking haggard and desperate. Lady Seraphina was notably absent. Rumour suggested she had already taken a lover, humiliating her husband in return for his treatment of Charlotte. "Miss Ashford," Lord Pemberton began, his voice lacking its former arrogance, "I wonder if I might speak with your sister." "No," Felicity said simply. "You had your opportunity with Charlotte, Lord Pemberton. You destroyed it spectacularly and publicly. You then attempted to reclaim her when your circumstances became dire, displaying a mercenary calculation that was utterly repugnant. There is nothing further to discuss. You don't understand the pressures of my position." "I understand perfectly," Dominic interjected coldly. "You are a man of rank and privilege who nevertheless managed to make a catastrophic mess of your life through arrogance and poor judgment. The consequences are yours to bear. Now leave Miss Ashford alone, or I shall be compelled to make this conversation more public than you would wish." Lord Pemberton's face reddened with humiliation and rage, but he recognized defeat when confronted with it. He retreated without another word, disappearing into the crowd of guests who now viewed him with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You know," Felicity observed, watching him go, "I thought I would feel more satisfaction at his downfall, but I find I mostly feel nothing. He's irrelevant to my life now, to Charlotte's life. He's just a small man who made terrible choices." "That," Dominic said, bringing her hand to his lips briefly, "is the surest sign of your complete recovery. When someone who once held power over you becomes merely pitiable, you've truly moved beyond their reach." The ball continued late into the night. Felicity danced more than she ever had, not just with Dominic, but with Mr. Blackwood from Bath, with a cousin of Aunt Agatha's, who proved surprisingly witty, with gentlemen who engaged her in actual conversation rather than merely performing their social duty. She watched Charlotte laugh genuinely for the first time in months, saw her sister's natural vivacity returning without the desperate edge it had carried in London. And when the Prince Regent himself solicited Felicity for a country dance, the symbolism was unmistakable, the Ashford family's complete rehabilitation in the eyes of the ton. "Dr. Thornfield speaks highly of your intelligence, Miss Ashford," the Prince Regent commented as they moved through the figures of the dance. "Claims you have a scholarly mind, quite remarkable in a young lady." "Dr. Thornfield is generous in his assessments, Your Highness," Felicity replied diplomatically. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we have been too quick to limit women's education and then criticize them for lacking depth." The prince's expression was shrewd. "I have daughters, Miss Ashford. I should like them to grow up in a world that values their minds as well as their beauty. People like you and Dr. Thornfield may help bring such a world into being." It was an unexpected endorsement from an unexpected quarter, and Felicity felt the last fragments of her old invisibility fall away. She was no longer the plain sister, unfit for the ton. She was simply Felicity, intelligent, capable, valued by people whose opinions actually mattered. The evening concluded in the early morning hours. As their carriage rolled away from Carlton House, Charlotte leaned her head on Felicity's shoulder with a contented sigh. "We did it," Charlotte murmured. "We survived the scandal, survived London's cruelty, and came back stronger. I never thought such a thing possible." "Neither did I," Felicity admitted. "I thought Lord Pemberton's rejection of you was the end of everything, but it was actually the beginning, the catalyst that forced us to discover who we were beyond society's narrow definitions." "And now?" Lady Constance asked, her voice tentative. She had been largely silent throughout the evening, watching her daughter's triumph with an expression that mingled pride and something like regret. "Now," Felicity said firmly, "we live our lives on our own terms. Charlotte will take time to discover her own passions without the pressure of the marriage mart, and I will marry Dr. Thornfield and partner with him in work that matters, in a life of genuine purpose rather than mere ornamental existence." Aunt Agatha, who had accompanied them, raised an imaginary toast. "To the Ashford sisters, who refused to remain victims of society's cruelty and instead became architects of their own destinies. May your example inspire other young women to similar courage." As dawn broke over London, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Felicity felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The path forward would not be conventional by ton standards. There would be those who criticized her choice of a modestly situated doctor over a titled fortune hunter, who questioned Charlotte's decision to remain unmarried while pursuing her artistic talents. But their opinions no longer had the power to wound. She had found something infinitely more valuable than society's approval. She had found herself, and in Dominic she had found a partner who valued that self completely. Everything else was merely commentary, interesting perhaps, occasionally amusing, but ultimately irrelevant to the life she intended to build. The plain sister had become extraordinary, not by transforming her appearance, but by refusing to accept the limitations others attempted to impose. And in that refusal, she had discovered a freedom more intoxicating than any ballroom triumph, the freedom to choose her own path, regardless of where society insisted she should walk. 6 months had passed since the royal ball, and autumn had settled over Norfolk with its characteristic beauty. Golden fields stretching toward horizons, ancient oaks blazing with colour, the North Sea visible in the distance as a slate-grey promise. Thornfield Manor, Dr. Dominic Thornfield's family estate, was modest by aristocratic standards, but possessed a comfortable elegance that reflected generations of understated gentility. The house had welcomed Felicity as its new mistress with surprising warmth, the servants genuinely pleased that their scholarly young master had found a companion who shared his passions. Felicity stood in the morning room that had been converted into a combined library and study, sunlight streaming through tall windows as she reviewed correspondence with the efficiency born of genuine purpose. Marriage to Dominic had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. They were partners in the truest sense, collaborating on his public health initiatives, hosting gatherings that combined intellectual discourse with genuine fellowship, building a life defined by shared values rather than social performance. "Another letter from the Sanitation Commission," Dominic announced, entering with his characteristic energy, still dressed in his riding clothes from an early morning visit to one of the tenant farms. He pressed a kiss to her temple before settling at the desk opposite hers. They had discovered they worked best in companionable proximity, able to consult each other without formality. "They want us to present our findings on the correlation between clean water access and infant mortality rates at the next meeting in London." "Us?" Felicity raised an eyebrow, pleasure warming her chest. "Well, it was your observation about the differential impacts on nursing mothers that transformed our basic data into a compelling argument for immediate intervention. You've become quite indispensable to the work, my love. The Commission members have learned to respect your analytical mind, however much it might scandalize certain quarters that a woman contributes to such discussions." Felicity smiled, remembering the initial resistance she had encountered from some of Dominic's more conservative colleagues. But data, she had discovered, was remarkably persuasive, and her meticulous approach to research had gradually won over even the skeptics. She had found her calling in this work, applying her long-suppressed intellectual capabilities to problems that genuinely mattered, saving lives rather than merely decorating drawing rooms. "I've also had a letter from Charlotte," Felicity said, gesturing to the elegant stationery beside her. "She's had another painting accepted for exhibition at the Royal Academy's summer exhibition, and she's attracted the attention of a Mr. Edmund Hartley, a widower and art collector who apparently finds her talent as compelling as her beauty. Is she interested? She's cautious, which is wise, but she writes that he treats her as an artist first, a potential companion second, that he engages with her work seriously, offers thoughtful critique, respects her dedication to her craft. If romance develops, it will be built on genuine foundation rather than superficial attraction." Dominic's expression was warm with approval. "Your sister has found her path as well, then. I'm glad. She deserved better than to be valued only for her appearance." They worked in comfortable silence for a time, the scratch of pens and rustle of papers punctuated by occasional questions or observations. This, Felicity reflected, was happiness, not the dramatic passion of romantic novels, but the deep contentment of building something meaningful alongside someone you profoundly respected and loved. They were equals in their partnership, each bringing complementary strengths, neither diminished by the other's accomplishments. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Thornton, the housekeeper, entered with evident pleasure. Begging your pardon, Dr. and Mrs. Thornfield, but there's a young woman from the village asking to see you. Mrs. Thornfield specifically says she heard you might help her learn to read proper, not just the basics the dame school taught." Felicity and Dominic exchanged glances. They had recently established a small school in the village, offering education to tenant children and any adults who wished to improve their literacy. It was an extension of Dominic's belief that public health required education as much as medical intervention, and Felicity had discovered an unexpected talent for teaching. "Send her in, please, Mrs. Thornton." What followed was a conversation that encapsulated everything Felicity's life had become. The young woman, Sarah, a dairymaid with ambitions of becoming a midwife, spoke haltingly about wanting to read medical texts to better serve her community. Felicity listened, remembered her own intellectual starvation, and immediately offered to tutor Sarah personally, to help her access knowledge that might otherwise remain forever beyond her reach. After Sarah left, glowing with gratitude and possibility, Dominic pulled Felicity into his arms. "Have I mentioned recently that I am extraordinarily fortunate in my choice of wife? You may have intimated such sentiments on occasion," Felicity replied, happiness bubbling up like champagne. "Though I believe I am the fortunate one. You saw worth in me when the entire ton had declared me insufficient. You valued my mind when I had been taught my only value lay in securing an advantageous match, which I comprehensively failed to do by society's standards. Society's standards are catastrophically flawed, Dominic said firmly. You are brilliant, compassionate, courageous, and possessed of integrity that would shame half the titled aristocrats in London. Lord Pemberton's rejection of your sister was the best thing that could have happened. It freed both of you from a world that would have slowly suffocated your spirits. A commotion from the entrance hall drew their attention. Voices raised in surprise and pleasure, followed by rapid footsteps. The door burst open to reveal Charlotte herself, travel-worn but radiant, followed by a distinguished gentleman in his 40s with kind eyes and an artist's observant gaze. "Surprise!" Charlotte laughed, embracing Felicity. "I couldn't bear to wait for your next visit to London. I wanted you to meet Edmund properly, Edmund Hartley. May I present my sister, Mrs. Felicity Thornfield, and her husband, Dr. Dominic Thornfield." What followed was a delightful afternoon of discovery. Edmund Hartley proved everything Charlotte's letters had suggested. Intelligent, respectful, genuinely fascinated by Charlotte's artistic talent. He spoke of her work with the seriousness it deserved, discussed technique and composition with the expertise of someone who truly understood the craft. And when he looked at Charlotte, it was with an admiration that encompassed her entire being, not merely her physical beauty. Over dinner that evening, a lively affair with much laughter and spirited debate, Charlotte pulled Felicity aside for a private moment. "I'm going to accept him," Charlotte confided, her eyes bright. "Edmund has asked me to marry him, and I'm going to say yes. Not because I need to secure a match, not because society demands it, but because I genuinely love him. Because he loves me, not the decorative doll I was in London, but the person I've become. The artist, the thinker, the woman who has opinions and passions." Felicity embraced her sister tightly. "I'm so happy for you, Charlotte. You deserve this. A partner who values you completely." "We both do," Charlotte replied. "And we both found them, but only after being forced to leave London's suffocating expectations behind. Can you imagine if Lord Pemberton had actually married me? I would have been trapped in a life of elegant misery, my creativity stifled, my worth measured only by my ability to ornament his household and produce heirs. Whereas now I'm marrying a man who has commissioned a studio to be built for me, who wants to travel throughout Europe visiting galleries and studying with masters, who considers my artistic development as important as any other aspect of our life together." Charlotte's smile was incandescent. The girl who was publicly humiliated at her engagement ball has become a woman who chooses her own destiny. It's rather extraordinary, isn't it? Later that night, after their guests had retired and the house had settled into quiet, Felicity stood at her bedchamber window, looking out over the Norfolk countryside. Dominic joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "That I'm grateful," Felicity replied softly. "Grateful for Lord Pemberton's cruelty, strange as that sounds. Because if he hadn't publicly rejected Charlotte, if our family hadn't been forced to flee London in disgrace, I would have remained invisible forever. The plain sister, unfit for the ton, slowly fading into spinsterhood, without ever discovering who I could be." "You would have found your way eventually," Dominic insisted. "Your spirit was too strong to remain suppressed forever." "Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to wait. I'm glad Aunt Agatha forced me into Bath society, glad I collided with you in that library, glad I was given the chance to become this version of myself, purposeful, valued, loved not despite my intelligence, but because of it." She turned in his arms, studying the face that had become more dear to her than any classical handsomeness could ever be. "You gave me that, Dominic. You and Aunt Agatha and Charlotte's disaster. Between you rescued me from a half-life of quiet desperation." "Then I am grateful too," Dominic said, kissing her softly. "Grateful that society's cruel judgment pushed you toward Bath. toward me, toward the life we're building together. Though I maintain that any man with sense would have seen your worth immediately, regardless of setting. Perhaps, but society doesn't reward sense, does it? It rewards conformity, superficiality, the performance of rigid roles. We've chosen to step outside those constraints, to build something different. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the darkened landscape. Somewhere in London, the Tun continued its elaborate dance, judging, excluding, elevating some while diminishing others based on arbitrary standards of worth. But that world's power extended only as far as one allowed. Here, in this corner of Norfolk, Felicity and Dominic were creating an alternative, a life measured by contribution rather than consequence, by genuine feeling rather than strategic alliance, by the content of one's character rather than the arrangement of one's features. The plain sister had discovered she was extraordinary after all, not through transformation into someone else, but through the courage to fully become herself. And in that becoming, she had found not just love, but purpose, partnership, and a freedom she had never dreamed possible. The Tun had called her unfit for their society. They had been correct, though not in the way they imagined. She was, indeed, unfit for a world that valued appearance over substance, submission over intelligence, decorative silence over passionate engagement with ideas. She had been meant for something larger, something more meaningful than the narrow confines they had attempted to impose. And now, standing in the home she shared with a man who valued every facet of her being, embarking on work that improved lives and challenged unjust systems, Felicity understood the final truth. Being rejected by a world that had nothing to offer her had been the greatest gift imaginable. It had freed her to discover where she truly belonged. She had bloomed exactly where she was planted, not in London's glittering ballrooms, but in Norfolk's practical beauty, in work that mattered, in love that saw her completely. And that blooming was more magnificent than any Tun triumph could ever have been. If you enjoyed Felicity and Charlotte's journey from humiliation to triumph, from invisibility to purpose, I'd be deeply grateful if you would subscribe to this channel and share this story with others who might need its message. Have you ever felt dismissed or underestimated by others? Have you found your own path after society tried to define you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone, and your stories inspire me to keep creating content that celebrates resilience, transformation, and the courage to choose your own destiny. Until our next story, remember, sometimes being unfit for a cruel world means you were meant for something far greater.